Just a few months ago, Asia's leaders were confident that their economies would be able to withstand the financial storm blowing from the West. Lessons learned from the Asian crisis a decade ago had prepared their economies with healthy foreign reserves ready as a buffer against external crises. But now Singapore, Japan and Hong Kong are already in recession, Taiwan and South Korea teetering on the edge, and China is slowing fast. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East we ask, is Asia about to suffer its second major economic crisis in a decade? China's rapid economic rise has been driven by manufacturing a supply of low-priced goods and becoming the world's workshop. But last month, its exports shrank for the first time in 7 years as global demand plunged. What will that mean for China's economic miracle and for the millions of workers that fueled it? Steve Nettleton reports.
At railway stations across southern China, workers are already heading home, 6 weeks ahead of Chinese New Year. They are not avoiding the holiday rush. Many are suddenly out of work, casualties of a global recession that China had hoped it could escape. Liu Weiqiang lost his job in the marketing department of a nanotechnology firm. Now he's returning to his native Sichuan province to start over.
For sales, right now the situation is not optimistic. We are all affected by the crisis. Demand is down and this directly affects us.
In the last few months, tens of thousands of jobs have vanished here in the Pearl River Delta near Hong Kong, the center of China's manufacturing industry. International orders have slowed considerably, driving down Chinese exports by more than 2% last month, the first shrink in exports in 7 years. Thousands of factories have shut down, some so suddenly that bosses left town without paying their workers. The economic forecast gives little reason for hope.
We are actually not expecting a significant turnaround until somewhere in 2010. And that means that companies and politicians and economies will have to brace themselves for a particularly tough 2009.
In the industrial city of Dongguan, sidewalks that were once bustling with workers have almost emptied, save for crowds of laid-off workers searching for new jobs.
You see, this street used to be very busy and prosperous. Now it's tough to earn a living, so fewer people live here. Almost all the migrant workers have gone home. Not for the Chinese New Year, but because they've lost their jobs. I will probably go home as well and be a farmer.
This mass exodus may in turn create new economic headaches back home.
The huge volume of migrant workers will lose their jobs and return to their villages. After they go back, it's difficult to work again on the farms. We then face a problem of how to deal with these people. I think the government, besides fine-tuning the economy, is also thinking of how to help migrant workers seek jobs.
In the hopes of once again filling company payrolls, the Chinese government has announced a nearly $600 billion stimulus package and slashed taxes and interest rates. Many factories are hoping the sizable domestic market can help keep their production lines running. OLT Computer Technology Company in Shenzhen is a major supplier of computer keyboards and mice. It has lost 30% of its orders from abroad, but says demand from Chinese computer makers remains high. While OLT says it has not been forced to lay off any of its workers, it has cut back on overtime.
This directly leads to a loss of employees, because there is less overtime, work hours are shorter, so income will decrease. Some workers resign on their own. They quit to find another job.
But with fewer jobs available, most will likely end up back here, booking a ticket in hopes of finding economic survival at home.
Well, joining me to talk about China's economic future and that of the rest of Asia are Cyrus Daruwalla, who's Managing Director of Financial Insights for the Asia-Pacific region. Professor Walden Bello is director of the Advocacy Institute, focus on the Global South, and Dr. Steve Keen, Associate Professor of Economics and Finance from the University of Western Sydney. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.
Walden Bello, let me begin with you, if I could, and just address one of the issues, the main issue of that particular story, and that is the social effects and the human effects of the slowdown. China, for the first time, is beginning to see massive relocations of people because of economic slowdown. How serious is that going to be?
Well, I think it will be extremely serious. I think we're really seeing, the first major crisis of the era of globalization. And we're really talking about a situation whereby what has happened so fast, has outstripped some of the most pessimistic predictions last year. And I think what has happened is precisely because economists took the advice of the World Bank and a number of other institutions and economists, they went into this headlong rush towards the global integration of markets and production.
We'll get into the practicalities in just a second, but just the human aspects of this, the massive migration of people from the cities to the country and back again is something that has scared China's politicians quite a lot. Do you think socially we're in for much more serious problems?
Oh yes, not only in China, but in Southeast Asia. I think we're going to see, in fact, workforces that were drawn to the cities by export-oriented industrialization go back and find out, as the woman said, that there are no more jobs on the farms, that the countryside itself has been transformed, and that many enterprises in the countryside have in fact gone out of business, and it's in a stagnant countryside. So if you're talking about a number of countries like the Philippines, for instance, we are talking about migrant workers from all over Asia and the world coming back, and that's going to be repeated in country after country after country.
I guess one upside, at least for China at the moment, is that the farms are still there. If globalization carries on as it has done in other developing countries, eventually the farms will disappear too, and there'll be nowhere for them to go.
Well, we have a very highly industrialized civilization these days. My own country's got the highest level of urbanization in the world. You certainly can't go back to the farm there.
So, as far as China is concerned then, can they weather what is going on at this stage? And how bad is it going to get?
Well, it's a global phenomenon, and I think we have to look back and see when did it start. And it really began right at the end of the Second World War, when we had the lowest level of leverage that we've had virtually historically. And right from that point on, the level of leverage has been growing. The turnaround in leverage is what's driving this crisis down, and it has an enormous distance to go yet.
As far as China is concerned, I guess one of the good things about the economy there is its flexibility still. Correct. They can go back to the country, but they can come back to the city as soon as possible. Sure. When's that going to happen?
Now, forgive me for being rather optimistic, but I think even the World Bank may have gotten it wrong. By the end of '09, you would see a distinct turnaround in China. You got to remember, China is the world's factory, yet will continue to be. So by the time you start seeing the stimulus packages come down to the consumers, which is you and I, and we start buying our sundries and our toys back again, it would be about a year. But again, it's not that bad for the factory of the world. So I think you would start seeing a U-turn in China by '09.
The good news is, of course, at some point, the recovery will arrive.
Correct.
End of 2009, is that a little bit too early?
No, that's very optimistic. I think we're in, I hate to mention the D word, but I think we're in for a global depression. And I think if you've seen the predictions from the last 2 years, things have worsened and unraveled much quickly than most analysts have seen. And I really think that when you have confidence and a downturn in the real economy interacting in this devilish spiral, you are going to see, in fact, a major, major downturn.
And that point of view actually is reasonably common. Even the Wall Street Journal last week had a front page article saying, why is it that all our economists keep calling for a bottom and every other day we get even worse news? Why are you so positive?
Correct, because again, for that very word that you mentioned, if you see the erosion of stocks as they have been doing, if you see the erosion of liquidity from the market, the capital markets, and if you see the absolute washout of all of speculative bits, there really is no more lower to go. So again, I suspect, again, that you would start seeing bad news wither away by April, May, June next year.
Well, is there lower to go?
How so?
I'd say a decade rather than a year. And the reason is simply we're going to have a deleveraging of debt. If you look at the American economy, the recorded level of debt there is about $55 trillion. Its economy is $14 trillion. If it was to get back to the debt situation it was at the end of the Second World War, and even in the mid-60s, you're talking about 2 or 3 years' worth of reduction of spending in that economy. If that occurred at 10% per annum, you can imagine the slump that would cause around the global economy. And every last country in the OECD, bar France, is in that situation.
All right, we'll have to take a short break for a moment. We'll pick the conversation up in just a moment. And when we come back, we'll also hear about how Indonesia is weathering the current global economic downturn. Stay with us.